our keynote speaker, Marco Vernocchi, the Global Chief Data Officer for EY. He's going to speak to us today about driving data or driving value at EY through trusted intelligence. Now, a little bit about Marco. Marco spent 28 years with Accenture, working and supporting Fortune 500 technology and media industry clients. As he described us about 18 months ago, he was attracted, he saw a great opportunity to join EY as their global CDO to help drive value at EY through the use of data, embedding trust into the data as it flows across their businesses. So without any further delay, allow me to turn over the microphone to our keynote speaker, Marco Vernocchi.
Thank you, John, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to be with all of you. I hope you can hear me and see me. So as a partner of the EDM Council, I'm very pleased to represent the EY point of view. If you don't mind going to the next page, please. You know that, I think I'm stating the obvious if I say that technology, artificial intelligence, and all of the applications that are based on machine learning and the likes transform not only our lives, but the way we work, the way we believe, and all of our experiences. At the same time, with more and more intelligence, what is clearly happening is that there is a growing phenomenon that I would refer to as the trust gap. So if you look at these few data points, right? This is coming from the Edelman Trust Barometer. When asked, 61% of respondents think that pace of change is too fast. 66% can't distinguish what is real from what is fake. And 61% believe that the regulators cannot keep up with the technology dynamism and the evolution and speed of it. So there's a growing trust gap. And for the first time, probably, something that is not a technology driver is becoming a disruptor, because closing the gap, closing the trust gap is not only about ethics or compliance, right? Closing the gap is a business imperative. Reality is that if you cannot be trusted by your markets, if you cannot be trusted by your customers, by your ecosystem, by the regulators, you run out of business very soon. And we have many examples of that are already visible out there in the market. So being trusted is about the ability to innovate and is about the ability to grow. So all of that said, in a world where intelligence must be trusted, the response is simple, is trusted intelligence. And let me show a video just to take you into the context of this and to introduce this new frontier, the world of trusted intelligence. If you can run the video, please.
Everything started with enterprise systems, which use structured data to support business processes. The first digital revolution was led by mobile and online technologies, which expanded the borders of an enterprise and brought us big data. Then came the AI revolution, fueled by an unlimited rise in data. Sensors, machine learning, and cloud computing transformed business models. Today, intelligent technologies have the power to bring exponential change. They learn on their own. They adapt and reinforce each other. Intelligent technologies create growth, innovation, and value. But new risks, such as unintended data use, threaten to undermine trust and create trust gaps. This is why, now more than ever, trust is a business imperative. It's vital to close trust gaps with customers and establish trust across markets, ecosystems, and regulators. To do this, EY developed Trusted Intelligence, our approach to embed trust into data on its journey to value creation.
Okay, so now, if trust is a business imperative, businesses cannot rely on others to close that trust gap as they arise and they develop and they are generated. So businesses, as well as governmental organizations and NGOs and so on, they need to act. And to do so, it's important to have an interpretation model. The one we use at EY is the intelligent value chain that you can see represented in this chart. What are the characteristics of this intelligent value chain? There are two fundamental principles here. The first one is that is value first. It's not data first, it's value first. And the second one, as you can see from the yellow snake, is that trust has to be everywhere. Now, the IVC, the intelligent value chain, define the core capabilities of an intelligent enterprise. And as we said, all of the enterprises will need to be intelligent at the point in time. And the capabilities are defining what are the essential components. Clearly, enterprises need to have a strong, clear, simple, intuitive value proposition that has to be supported by sustainable business models that operate seamlessly, powered by intelligence, AI, machine learning, and the likes, supported and fueled by data, and clearly underpinned by advanced technologies. The point here is that the concept of intelligent value chain is built on the concept of trust, and the point is that trust has to be balanced across the entire value chain, because it doesn't matter if you are very strong on trusted data or trusted AI or on a trusted and cyber secure technology, or if your value proposition is trustful, right? The point is you'll be as weak as the weakest point in the chain. And so balance and harmony across the intelligence value chain is what will drive your priorities, right? Your investments, and define your trusted intelligence trajectory. The point is, if you don't do so, it's very likely that you will not be able to sustain a successful journey. So this concept of intelligent value chain is very important because also requires a constant dynamic assessment of the level of trust in each one of the capabilities and across all of them. Mike mentioned before the DCAM as a best practice framework to assess the different capability models that could be used to assess the different degree of trust in each of the different components. But let me take you now to what we do at EY from the data office perspective to support and sustain this concept of the intelligent value chain. And we are defined the data office around 6 main capabilities that I'm going to describe briefly to you. You see them represented in this chart. The first one is the concept of data policies. This is a very important part of any, let's say, data strategy or data-driven program. It goes by itself. There may be internal data policies. There are many laws, national, international, that are very often not even consistent among themselves if you operate on a multinational level. There are professional standards, and this entire world of the data policies is in a constant evolution. So it's very important to have a strong, let's say, grasp on what is happening on that front. The second important capability is what we call data sourcing. And again, I really like to underline this one because very often it's considered as a given. The reality is that for a data-centric enterprise, for a data-driven enterprise, data has to be considered as a core asset. And I think some of you already mentioned that during your own introduction and presentation. The reality is that the market of data, data vendors, data assets, data products, data services, and so on, is very, very fragmented and is in constant evolution. So the ability for an enterprise to navigate and the complexity, to get some sort of orientation, not only on what kind of data providers are out there, but also what are the legal terms, what are the commercial terms, what are the technical standards, is extremely important for the success of a data-driven execution program. The other one that you see there is the concept of trust services. And this is very important because it is something that applies to, obviously, cybersecurity and this kind of, let's say, controls, but it's also very important, or at least it has been important at EY, to define the concept of attribute-based access control versus role-based access control. And again, you may have heard about that. You may have some experiences on this. But what I maybe want to summarize here is that the traditional world is about role-based access control. So a user profile can do something with a set of transactions and a set of data. In the new world with more complexities, applying attribute-based access control, or ABAC, gives us the possibility to apply controls on the access and the usage of data that are not only associated to the role, but also to the context. So the rules can depend, and the rights of using the data can depend on where the person is, what is the purpose that the person wants to achieve, and when the person is going to use the data. So not only the role and the data, but also all of these contextual elements. These ABAC controls is something that we are introducing into our own systems and landscape. It's not easy to do, but clearly makes our ability to introduce trust into our way of managing data, which is very, very different from the past, because it's a significant upgrade. The trusted data fabric, you see the box at the bottom, is another important element that we are working on, because clearly policies, data sets, trust, services and control principles need to be executed through some sort of technology. And the concept of data fabric, which has been also mentioned before, is very important because it takes the entire approach from the traditional space of data warehouses or big data lakes that fundamentally were moving the data into one single location with a number of challenges about duplication, data movements, but also sovereignty, into the concept of a distributed data storage and data processing. And then on top of that, we developed a global semantic layer based on taxonomies and ontologies and common data models that is operated through an integrated data management environment. So we're able to decouple the physical infrastructure and the physical storage of data from the processing and the utilization of data and metadata. That has been an important part of our own strategy and evolution, which is clearly becoming more and more relevant even now, even more now when it comes to data sovereignty and more restrictive geopolitical, let's say, conditions. And then to close a little bit of my quick introduction here, we also are building what we call intelligent data that, in our perspective, it shouldn't be confused with the data science or the, let's say, business analytics stuff, which is another part of the EY organization. When I refer to intelligent data, I'm referring to the, let's say, standardization of a large number of assets that normally are recreated every time by different solutions, with different client teams, different parts of the organization. To give you a couple of examples, we created a library of reusable data sets. We created a library of reusable data pipelines. And most of you are very familiar with the complexity, the technical difficulties, the long lead time, the costs to develop data pipelines. And what we are building is a library of reusable pipelines for different type of data flows that are accelerating the, let's say, the configuration of solutions and the delivery of services. Other type of data assets are associated to the common data models. Again, that is something that has been mentioned before, but we are also doing a lot of activities in articulating a model of models that clearly represent the large, let's say, a scope of services that EY is doing by sector, by geography, by, let's say, by functional area. By creating these common data model, common ontologies, common taxonomies, we are able to collect and reuse the knowledge of EY in a much more manageable way. And this is a very important point to create the level of interoperability that otherwise gets lost. Last and not least is what we call the data-driven services. And again, to simplify, you can refer to that as data stewardship, data translation, and you can use the language that you are more familiar with. But in essence, the point is transforming into a data-driven organization before being a technological or a data challenge is a cultural point, is a literacy problem. And data is just 4 words, but is a world of complexity, is a kaleidoscope of dimensions, as you well described during the different parts. Is the policies, is the sourcing, is the technology, is the data model, is the data science. So you can take data from many, many different angles, and every time is a different story. The reality is very hard to master that complexity. And no one of us is an expert on all of these dimensions. The question is, how can you translate this world of complexity in simple terms and into the business, into the organization, into the user side? That is very important and is a fundamental component of what I always say is a data-driven program, which is a change program, is a cultural program. And my final point on this one, if I have 1 more minute, is about the growing importance of the Chief Data Officer as a change agent within the organization. So I think Mike mentioned that we're moving from the data engineering side, right, into the data management, into the ethics and so on. More and more, I think, or I see, this is becoming a value creation type of role and so on, with many challenges, because in essence, a lot of my, for instance, a lot of my time is dedicated to translating into simple business terms with different degrees of counterparts, the complexities in a way that is, as I said before, value first. So how can you explain the importance of being data-driven to the business users in the functional areas and in any other part of the organization up to the boards? One of the challenges is that it's very rare that the Chief Data Officer sits in the board. And in a world that is becoming more and more data-driven, AI-driven, and so on, that is a very severe missing link, because the lack of awareness, the lack of understanding, the lack of literacy of most of the boards and the C-level is, in a sense, preventing the full power of being data-driven. And very often what happens is that data are used to power the traditional way of doing things, instead of creating new ways, entirely new ways of doing things. With that, let me pause here I'm open for any question if we still have time, or otherwise happy to connect offline.
So Marco, this is John again. A fantastic perspective. A couple of quick takeaways for me. One is when we think about the data value chain, overlaying it with that trust value chain is really important perspective. And you know, if a link breaks, you not only lose data quality, but you lose trust. And I'm going to make a prediction that data professionals will be held to a fiduciary responsibility of ensuring the data is of high quality. It's not a nice to have anymore, but it's a business imperative. I think it needs to be done. And I love your comment about the chief data officer at the board level. When I became a CDO 15 years ago and I sat in the C-suite, I would tell people I sat at the kids' table. So it's good to see that the CDO has progressed over the years to a more dominant role in industry. Mike, I think we have a couple of really good questions that came out. Marco, if you have a few minutes, I'll ask Mike to run through those questions.
Sure, John, thank you, and Marco as well. Really good comments. One observation from me is that often the question might be, is there a business case for trust? This is actually at the beginning of the data ethics course, is that there is a ROI for trust. Companies can measure their trust factor in the marketplace. Those that are more trusted as brands and delivery providers are generating more value to their end customers and retaining them as well. So there is a great ROI for investing into trust. So with that, let me ask the first of two questions, Marco. The first from Mike, it is, what is seen as the greatest constraint or challenge in achieving trust in data initiatives?
So the first point about the ROI, right? And I think the most challenge is, in a sense, it's important to explain that trust is not only risk prevention, right? It's not just compliance. It's not just, let's say, ethical or a defensive move. It is very important. That is a very important aspect of trust. But trust is the upside as well. Trust is business creation. Let me give you a very simple example, right? Would you jump into a self-driven vehicle if you wouldn't trust it?
I think,
right? The answer is no. No one of us will trust it, right? The point is, to trust the vehicle, you need to trust the engine, you need to trust the sensors, you need to trust the ecosystem that is making the vehicle connected into the context. So the point is, trust is business. Would you trust moving money, your personal financials, from one bank to another one, if you wouldn't trust the bank or the financial institution that is wiring your data, your money from one place to the other? So trust is so important that, I mean, is business, and the ROI is that without trust, you're out of business. The point is that very often trust is perceived like not only, let's say, if I play this example, the defense is not only defensive and offensive, or protection and business, is very often considered compliance. That is part of the cultural change, right, that I was referring before. And so this perception is probably one of the most important barrier to the adoption of trust.
Marco, in fact, one of our audience members actually raises this question around what sort of cultural shift is required in order to make the organization data-driven, and who should champion that initiative?
Well, as I said, in between the lines of my presentation, right? I think one of the important points of the intelligent value chain and the trusted intelligence approach is value first, and trust everywhere. But value first is the starting point. So the important point is that we are always able to connect the power of data and all of the implications that brings into a value proposition, right? And value could be concrete value, so business results, as well as a perception of value. So people need to understand what they can do differently right? To create new opportunities, to open up new type of relationship in the ecosystem. But value first is my answer. It's not data first, which is a little bit counterintuitive for a chief data officer, but it's not about having all of the data in the world. It's being able to have the data that you need for the specific value proposition that you want to sustain.
And Marco, for the other part of the question of who should champion the cultural shift to making an organization data driven, what's your take on who should lead the charge?
Well, this is, in the ideal world, it should come from the C-level, right? From the boards, from the C-level. That's why I mentioned that there is a lack of presence. There's also a lack of, let's say, awareness and knowledge at that level. A lot of people talk about data-driven and so on, but not necessarily all of them. They understand intuitively the importance of it. So in a genuine, in a good faith, right? But they are lacking the instruments, right? The background, because it's something new. In some cases, is the chief data officer, even when he or she has enough room to act in that way. Otherwise, it depends on where that is in the organization. And again, I don't think, because data is so pervasive, I don't think there's one single role that is the deputy for that. Could be the chief marketing officer, the chief financial officer, the technology officer, anyone, right? The point here is not about the role, is about the leadership, is the interpretation of the person that is able to drive this message.
Marco, thank you very much. Outstanding. John, over to you.
Sure, and likewise, Marco, thank you for being our keynote today, taking the time out. Fantastic perspective, so thank you very much. Okay, so with that, this our EMEA EDM Council DataVision will draw to a close. As promised, we'll conclude with the final drawing for a free training class, but before I do that, let me thank again our sponsors, EY, Timber AI, Atacama, and Big Data. A big shout out to all of our speakers and our panelists. And again, a final thank you to all of you who attended today.